Welcome to the News Roundup, Friday, January 9, 2026. I'm Bill Thomas, and here's what's happening right now. Authorities fire back at left-wing Democrats, blaming their incendiary political rhetoric over Minnesota's ICE shooting for stoking the flames of violence throughout the entire country. Democrats on Capitol Hill turning a congressional investigation into a three-ring circus as they take painstaking efforts to deflect attention away from Governor Tim Walz and his staggering fraud scandal. And a politician from Somalia, get this, now claims he warned the Biden administration for years about massive fraud taking place with American tax dollars, only to have his desperate pleas repeatedly ignored. Also, Iran's supreme leader is blaming President Trump as his country's massive anti-government demonstrations continue to grow by leaps and bounds. And the biggest names in Hollywood prepared to take center stage at the Golden Globes as the awards season kicks into high gear. All this and much more coming up right now on the Big Roundup. We have a great deal to get to today, and we begin in Minneapolis, where outrage is growing over this week's deadly ICE shooting amid accusations that political rhetoric by far-left Democrats is making the situation a whole bunch worse. As local protests continue to grow, ICE officials are now pointing their fingers directly at squad members such as Ilhan Omar and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and accusing them of endangering their agents by overhyping the federal government's responsibility for the incident. Despite growing video evidence to the contrary, Omar, AOC, and even former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, they're all calling the tragic shooting a flat-out murder. I guess investigations aren't necessary because Judge Clinton has already made a ruling. Omar also takes it a step further by claiming that ICE is blatantly terrorizing the public, committing state-sponsored violence and recklessly spreading fear and chaos throughout the entire area. And basically, that's code for let's get away from all the $9 billion in fraud talk and the $30 million in her bank account nonsense. Yes, well done. For his part, ICE's acting director now says the entire incident could have been avoided entirely if local authorities simply agreed to work alongside the federal government instead of fighting them every step of the way, and if the public did not intentionally track, harass, and interfere with legitimate law enforcement operations. Exactly, folks there are simply playing with fire. Now, in the meantime, new details about the incident still emerging, and federal officials now revealing that at the time of the tragic confrontation, the unfortunate victim of the shooting, a 37-year-old mother of three, Renee Good, she was actually working part of a collective ICE watch team that actively monitors and disrupts federal immigration enforcement efforts. Meanwhile, unruly protesters continue to clash with federal agents as Minnesota Governor Tim Walz vainly tries to keep a lid on the angry demonstrations by urging people to remain calm and honor the dead woman's memory with a day of unity. Nevertheless, some lawmakers now blaming the incompetent Walz and his fellow Democrats for making things worse. They say that he, Congresswoman Omar, and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, they're all completely delusional that the ICE agent who fired his weapon was obviously defending himself, and that by stirring the pot and riling up the crowd, they're all guilty of putting more federal officers directly in harm's way. Final thoughts, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. Right now, the one thing that every single law-abiding, hard-working American citizen can agree on is that this week's ICE shooting in Minnesota is tragic. One person has been killed. We've all seen the graphic footage, and we all wish this had never happened. As with all law enforcement-related shootings, an investigation began shortly after the incident, and by all accounts, that investigation right now is still ongoing. This early in the game for Congresswoman Ilhan Omar and her squad member pal Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to dive right in with very limited facts and call the federal agent a murderer. It's irresponsible and it's actionable. It's sick and it's downright dumb. Got a couple of unintelligent fools making dangerous claims without the facts to back up their ranting and their raving. By the way, acting ICE Director Todd Lyons wrongfully called those comments political rhetoric. And the way I see it, Mr. Lyons was being generous. And in fact, it's much deeper than just rhetoric. Both Omar and AOC have done everything they can to vilify ICE agents, their operation in the state of Minnesota, and their reputation nationwide, which in turn makes their missions even more complicated and that much more dangerous as well. And more on Omar. And we'll get to a real stand-up guy, Governor Tim Walz, here shortly. Madam Omar, your state has defrauded taxpayers to the tune of as much as $9 billion. You have a massive illegal immigrant problem and tons of other issues as well in your region. Now, calling an ICE agent a murderer, that will do nothing to address the crisis which your state is going through right now. You've just taken part in an epic fail. Tuning now to Washington, where a number of loudmouth Democrats are doing their very best to turn a legitimate congressional probe of Governor Tim Walz and his staggering fraud scandal into a veritable three-ring circus. Right now, the House Oversight Committee is in the process of holding a series of critical hearings to determine why Walz intentionally ignored repeated warnings from whistleblowers that billions of dollars of taxpayer money were being stolen right under his nose. However, according to reports, rather than taking part in a legitimate investigation of more than $9 billion in potential fraud, several Democratic lawmakers on the panel, they're instead choosing to ignore the evidence completely and disrupt proceedings at every turn. It's just disgraceful. In addition to utterly disregarding the obvious elephant in the room, these Democrats in denial are also taking their deflection one step further by making long-winded speeches that go nowhere, kind of like filibustering, while ultimately blaming President Trump for creating the fraud problem in the first place. Among their outrageous claims that by pardoning a number of convicted fraudsters, Trump is actually doing more harm to the American public than what's going on in Minnesota. If you can believe they actually said that. Additionally, instead of focusing on the matter at hand, the Democrats using their precious time to filibuster, I just said that a moment ago, about such inconsequential matters as the renaming of the Kennedy Center, while also wasting valuable minutes by accusing Republicans of taking part in a xenophobic witch hunt against Somalis, and wrong on all accounts. Perhaps most disgustingly, one representative from Massachusetts actually spent her entire allotted time screaming at whistleblowers at the top of her lungs, calling them hypocrites and raking them over the coals about a couple of President Trump's most questionable pardons. Now, in case you're keeping track so far, federal authorities have already charged nearly 100 individuals with taking part in a variety of social service fraud schemes in Walz-y land, and at least 85 of them are of Somali descent. As a result, Vice President J.D. Vance now says that President Trump is creating a new and special Attorney General position to concentrate specifically on fraud cases throughout our entire country, adding that massive theft is likely taking place in California, Ohio, and other parts of the U.S. as well. Lots to take in there. And final thought, this is the News Roundup Lowdown. It took far too long, but finally a solution is in place. And it's beginning to sound like we have an intelligent answer to what sounds like a few missing dollars down Minnesota way. Just a couple of bucks. Now, we've all heard stories about the $9 billion worth of fraud, possibly more, maybe a pinch less, in Tim Walz's well-governed state of Minnesota. Understandably, everyone wants answers. Most people want the truth. Although, frankly, I don't think you can handle the truth.
You can't handle the truth!
And here's how it's all panning out. Dozens of folks have been charged in the big Minnesota caper. Many have been tried, convicted, found guilty. They're behind bars, and investigations, still going on right now. It's already so ugly that Tim Walz has stepped out of the race and will not be running for governor in November. But according to Democrats at this goofy hearing, here's the real story, America. Here's what they want you to know. They say President Trump handed out a couple of pardons. The price of beef is too high. They were complaining about an affordability crisis. And apparently there's something happening somewhere in Mississippi. They brought all this up. They say JFK received some kind of a medal. Great. And all states should be audited, and Republicans are xenophobic. That's their takeaway. Therefore, and personally, I think the Democrats, they're spot on. Leave Minnesota alone, go away, and when the accounting is finally done, that reported $9 billion worth of fraud, that might be downgraded to maybe only $8 billion in pilfered dough. And like they say, Minnesota, come for the lakes and stay for the free cash. Actually, it'd be alleged free cash. We'll stick with a bit of a related topic now and shift our focus to a high-level politician from Somalia who claims he's been desperately trying for years to warn American officials about rampant fraud concerning U.S. aid to his country, only to have his urgent pleas fall on deaf ears. The lawmaker is a member of Somalia's parliament and serves on his country's Foreign Affairs Committee as well. And he says beginning in 2022, he began contacting the Biden administration to alert them to the massive amount of fraud, embezzlement, and mismanagement which was taking place in the World Food Program, the one they were sponsoring, and that they responded by giving him the cold shoulder. Furthermore, the Somali lawmaker also claims that he reached out repeatedly to members of Congress, the U.S. Embassy, and the Office of Inspector General as well, and that despite providing a number of detailed reports as proof, he was consistently ignored by all of them. Goes on to say they all treated him as if he himself was the problem for sounding the alarm in the first place, and that rather than holding corrupt Somali officials accountable for their crimes, they instead allowed the theft of much-needed food aid to go on for years and years. This gets deeper every day. In case you're not aware, the Trump administration recently paused all federal assistance to the government of Somalia after officials there destroyed a U.S.-funded World Food Program warehouse and illegally seized dozens of tons of much-needed food aid. Now, as a result, the Somali politician now says he's kind of relieved that our country is finally opening our eyes to the problem and becoming concerned about these crimes. He also says that President Trump's zero tolerance policy for fraud completely aligns with his own. Also, that he's anxious to meet as soon as possible with Team Trump to provide them with detailed briefings of everything he knows. Final thought, and this is the News Roundup Lowdown. Here's the bottom line. We live in a world where we can send rocket ships into outer space. We have surgeries where a spare heart can be plunked into somebody else's body, and our military has bombs that can split the world in half. They're that powerful. Therefore, some would argue, by and large, we're a pretty bright bunch. So it really shouldn't take too much effort to find out who's got their hand in the till, how much dough they're planting into the pockets of their corduroy jeans, and then invent some kind of a way to stop them dead in their tracks before an even $10, 10 measly bucks, disappears. Also, think on this. The reported $9 billion in stolen dough, it wasn't lifted by a bunch of financial geniuses who knew how to work the system. Rather, that money was lifted by a group of simpletons who knew all too well how to get rich quick. By the way, our News Roundup spies tell us that whistleblowers, they told Governor, take all you want, Tim, exactly what was happening. And apparently they were all told in no uncertain terms, keep your mouths shut. We even got boots on the ground in Somalia claiming they told U.S. officials what was happening, but nobody would stop and listen. Today, the damage has already been done. The Trump administration, however, is listening. They're on the job. The fix is in. And Minnesota is right now going through an enormous wake-up call. Turn our attention now to breaking revelations concerning the Chinese Communist Party and their underhanded attempt to buy property and land right next door to U.S. military bases. It's all in order to undermine our country's vital defense systems. A number of national security experts now sounding the alarm following reports that a well-known former Chinese intelligence official currently owns a pair of golf courses located near a key Air Force base in Louisiana. Even more disturbingly, that base is headquarters for the command team, which oversees a majority of our country's nuclear arsenal, including intercontinental ballistic missiles as well as nuclear bombers. This should have you very alarmed. Additionally, authorities recently charged an illegal immigrant from China with sneaking onto a couple of Air Force bases in Missouri and taking pictures of critical technology, including our stealth bombers. Experts say these revelations all add up to further proof that China is currently exploiting our nation's blind spots, secretly positioning themselves near our country's most sensitive military installations, and preparing to wreak havoc on our infrastructure if we ever go to war. Now, some additional headlines we're also keeping a very close watch on right here in the News Roundup newsroom. And first up, Iran's supreme leader now threatening to unleash a severe crackdown on the millions of people who are flooding the streets of his country, all to protest the policies of the Islamic regime. Also blaming their growing demonstrations on the influence of President Trump, who vows there will be hell to pay if Tehran uses any type of extreme violence against the crowds. If you read between the lines, think about it, kind of sounds like Iran is beginning to fall. Moving along, Russia says they're now rejecting President Trump's 20-point peace plan to end their war in Ukraine, claiming the potential deployment of Western peacekeeping force is a total deal breaker. Meanwhile, they've just upped the ante by using their state-of-the-art hypersonic missile for only the second time in the entire 4-year war. Hey, look, Russia, they did not invent war, but I think they're working overtime on trying to perfect it. Also, closer to home, President Trump now says plans are in the works for the U.S. military to begin hitting a number of land targets in Mexico. It's all part of their ongoing campaign against violent drug cartels in the region. And now a quick gander at a bit of showbiz news, and we kick things off today in sunny Southern California, my home base, with a colossal move for a best-selling author and her overpriced lawyer, hubby. According to reports, thanks to her Boffo book sales, former Vice President Kamala Harris and her husband, Doug Emhoff, the $2,000 an hour super attorney, now stepping up in weight class and swapping their modest Brentwood bungalow for a luxurious $10 million compound in Malibu. That, right there, that is the epitome of a success story. Be an ineffective one-term U.S. vice president, run a $1 billion campaign for the White House, fail dramatically, write a goofy fiction book, and then spend $10 million for a crib at the beach in Malibu, California. I'll tell you, one day when I grow up, I'm going to write a fake book too so I can live like royalty by the sea. Moving along, former late-night host and often unfunny comedian Conan O'Brien now getting up on his soapbox and criticizing his fellow stand-up performers. O'Brien says that over the past few years, a lot of the comics simply replaced cutting-edge humor with anger and screaming, especially when it comes to President Trump, and that as a result, they're no longer funny at all. And he should know. Yeah, I'm no fan of that Conan O'Brien fella, but hey, this time I think you got it right. You're a one-trick pony if your comedy is all predicated upon beating up on the president. That's easy. Easy pickings. Well done, Coco, and takes me back to something that Mr. O'Brien said when he was just starting out all those years ago. He said, and I sort of kind of quote, "One day I want to be the host of The Tonight Show on NBC for 6 or 7 months, and then be a podcast host. That's what they call a solid career path. And we'll see you at the Oscars, Coco." Turning now to Hollywood, where this weekend, speaking of the Oscars, all the A-listers in Tinseltown, they'll be completely glued to the 83rd Golden Globes Awards for an inkling of who might come out on top in this year's Academy Awards. Among the leading contenders to keep an eye on, Leonardo DiCaprio, that fella right there. Also, Timothy Chalamet, Jenna Ortega, and a few more, all the pretty people. Now, I'll tell you in advance who's going to win, but I always get it wrong every year, and I don't want to disappoint you, so I'm not going to say a thing. However, and so you know, yeah, Mr. DiCaprio, he will not only win the Golden Globe, but the Academy Award as well in just a few months. And Jennifer Lawrence will also be walking away with one of those nifty, shiny little trophies. And now it is time for us to call it a wrap on the big news roundups. Have an awesome day today. Stay safe. And if you haven't done so already, don't forget to hit that little subscribe button right there. With that, we're going to dim the lights to ease into the weekend, fade to black, and we'll see you right back here next time for another episode of the Big News Roundup.